All right, I'm back for another ranking video. Today I'm going to rank the albums of Haken, and I'm going to do the Restoration EP in here as well. That gives us a total of 8 albums. The Restoration EP is 33 minutes. That's the length of some albums these days, so I think it makes sense to include it here. Plus, just because there's only 8, that'll give me a little bit more to talk about. Now, a lot of people watch my Dream Theater ranking, which is awesome. Thank you so much to everyone who enjoyed it and commented. But a lot of people were getting really upset with me on there. And I want to say before I get into this that this is completely my opinion. All of these rankings are totally subjective, and my opinion is based on when I started listening to the band, what kind of music I like, where I'm at right now, because my rankings have changed over the years with Dream Theater and with Haken and with whatever else I rank. So this is all just my opinion, completely subjective. Your opinion is totally valid too. So just because you don't agree with me doesn't mean you have to get super defensive in the comments. Some people being like, I can't believe you wouldn't put this one at number 1. And it's like, okay, I'm sorry. That's my opinion. But please let me know what your rankings are in the comments. I'd be very interested to see that. With all that out of the way, I'm going to rank these from worst to best. And I'm not going to put these in a tier list because Haken's discography is so strong that every single one of these albums would be in A or S. Maybe the lowest one would be like a B+ for me. But I love every single one of these albums. Absolutely love every single one of these albums. I think they're all really, really great. So if I put one you like a little bit lower, don't get offended. I love all of these albums, and it was very difficult for me to put this in an order. I had to think about it for a while, and I re-listened to a few of the albums too before I did this. So, starting at the bottom, we have their debut album, Aquarius, an album I really enjoy, but one that I never got into quite as much as some of their later stuff. I started listening to Haken around the time they did The Mountain, so this was an older album I didn't really go back to too much, but I have listened to it quite a few times over the last couple of years, and I do really enjoy it. For me, the reason it's at the bottom is because it feels like a band still trying to figure out exactly what they want their sound to be. And it's very circusy, which I like that to a certain extent, but there's a lot of that on here. There's also the death growls on here, which I love. I listen to a lot of crazy heavy music, but for Haken's style of music, I don't know how well it fits, especially the types of harsh vocals they have on this album. It's not terrible, but I see why they got rid of it later on because it doesn't really fit their music perfectly. There's a lot of great songs on this album though. Celestial Elixir is an awesome epic. I love The Point of No Return and Streams and Drowning in the Flood. I mean, there's a lot of really great stuff in here. It's a pretty long album, which is okay because there's a lot of interesting things happening, but I'm going to put Aquarius at the bottom at number 8. For number 7, we're going to go to 2018's Vector, and a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me because I know this is a really popular album for a lot of people, and I really enjoyed this one, but not quite as much as a few of their other ones. This feels a little bit more one note. They really leaned into the heaviness here, which I really enjoy. I love Haken's riffs. I love when they break out the 8-string and go super heavy. But there's not quite enough variety on here for me. It's also a pretty short album, but there are some incredible songs in here. I love Puzzle Box. Veil is a great epic, not quite as good as some of the other ones I'll talk about later. And of course, Nil by Mouth is a really awesome instrumental. And they go super heavy with the 8-string guitar, and they start to bring in some more interesting rhythmic ideas here. Some of the stuff in Nil by Mouth is quite complicated. I think I talked about that on a video a few years ago. But there's some interesting polymetric, polyrhythmic stuff happening, which is really cool and adds to that heavy, djenty vibe. But this is an awesome album. I just had to put it down here because I have to have something near the bottom. In number 6, we have their newest album, Fauna, from 2023. I think if this list had come out a couple of years ago, this one would have been a little bit higher, but it's not one I've gone back to a ton. I really love what they're experimenting with on this album, and I'd like to see them kind of push in further to that going forward. But there's some things that just don't work quite as well for me. There's a lot of incredible rhythms on this album. The most complicated rhythms Haken's ever done. Some really weird stuff. And for the most part, it works incredibly well. But there's a few times where it feels like the experimentation in the rhythms and the sound is taking precedence over the songwriting. Just, it's not very often, but occasionally. And sometimes it works really well, and then there's just sometimes where it's not working quite so well. And this album doesn't have quite the hooks that I expect from Haken. There are some good ones. There's some really good ones on here, but not quite as often do I get the hooks as I do on some of their earlier albums. There are a couple of standout songs in here, though. Sempiternal Beings is an absolutely incredible song. One of the coolest choruses from a rhythmic perspective, but also just from a melodic perspective, too. Love the riffs on that song. I really like Elephants Never Forget. That's a great long song. I know Charlie wrote most of that, so hopefully his absence isn't too felt going forward. Not much else to say here. I really love what they're experimenting with on this album, and I hope they push into that a little more going forward. But there was just a couple of things that didn't quite work for me. All right, from their newest album to one of their older albums, in number 5, I have Visions, and I'm jumping all over the place timeline-wise, and that's because Haken's discography is just so good from beginning to end. So it's not like they just progressively get better. It's been good since the beginning. And Visions is one that I discovered after I listened to The Mountain, which was the first one I listened to. I went back and listened to Visions, and I was like, wow, this is really good as well. This is very much their most, I guess, maybe standard progressive metal album. Really the one that is more in the Dream Theater kind of vein, which is totally fine with me because Haken, to me, kind of took over that mantle where Dream Theater started to fall off, and I was looking for something like some quote-unquote standard progressive metal that had mostly clean singing, something to kind of fill that void, and that's where Haken stepped into that spot for me. And Visions is an incredible album, and it has a lot of those influences, but it definitely has their own stamp on it too. I feel like this album, they really started to find their sound, and then by the time they hit The Mountain, which I'll talk about later, they really found their sound. The title track, Visions, is probably my favorite from this album. I think it's a really great epic, one of their bests. I love Nocturnal Conspiracy. Shapeshifter is a really cool song. There's a lot of great music on this album. In 4th place, we have 2020's Virus. And this one, for me, gets above Vector, even though they're really two parts of the same album, essentially. They probably could have made a double album out of this. But this one is higher for me because of two things. One is Carousel. I absolutely love that song. It was the first song I did a full analysis for on this channel. You can go check that out. Although maybe don't, because it was 5 years old at this point, so maybe it's not that good. I don't know. I haven't rewatched it in a while. The other reason is the Messiah Complex suite of songs. That has, I think, the best riffing Haken's ever done. There's that riff in Marigold, which I've done a lesson on, which is absolutely incredible. And then the big, heavy riff in the last movement, too. This album just hits you in the face from start to finish, but it also has enough variety to keep it interesting. If Vector was like a 90% for me, this one is a 95. But they're very much two sides of the same coin. And honestly, you could listen to them back to back, and you should, because I think they work really well together. But in 4th place is Virus. In 3rd place, I have the Restoration EP. And this is for one reason. Crystallized, which is my favorite Haken song and one of my favorite prog songs ever. I know it's based off of older demos, but the way they were able to take those and turn them into something that was more fitting of their style at the time is really cool. So it has some of those quirkier, circusy moments from Aquarius, for example, but done more in the style of The Mountain and the sound that they had at the time. And I think it turned out really well. I do really like the other two songs on here as well. So they're not really dragging this down, but it's really crystallized, which brings this up so high for me. Now, obviously, you don't have to include this in your rankings if you just consider the full-length studio albums, but I think this is a long enough EP that I wanted to put it on this list, and I wanted to be able to talk about Crystallized because I love that song. So the Restoration EP is number 3. In 2nd place, we have Affinity from 2016. And this is one that I didn't think was going to be this high on my ranking, but when I listened through these albums again over the last week or two, this one really jumped up high for me. It probably would have been, 3rd or 4th before that, but this is an incredibly consistent album all the way through. And a lot of people say this is Haken's 80s album, and it is. It does have some of those influences, 1985, for example, but even that song has some crazy heavy 8-string riffage. And The Architect is very much a dark, dissonant song in a lot of places. It doesn't really have that happy 80s vibe, but then it's offset by some songs that do. So there's a really good variety on here. They started to do a little bit more experimentation with rhythms and with some sounds and production stuff on this album compared to a few of their earlier albums, which they do even more of later on, but it still keeps a lot of that traditional prog metal aesthetic overall. I think this is just a great, strong album from start to finish. The Architect is probably the standout here because It's the Big Epic. That's a song that's really grown on me over the years. But I love 1985 as well. Bound by Gravity is a great closer, and Initiate is an awesome opener. But this is a really strong album from start to finish, and one that's jumped up quite a bit in my rankings over the years. This ranking was really hard for me to do because, as I said, I love all of these albums. But number one was not a hard decision, and this was never going to be in question, and it's The Mountain from 2013. This is one of my favorite albums of all time. I think it's one of the best progressive metal albums ever. This is in my top 10 albums of all time. I made a video about that a couple of years ago, my top 10 albums of all time, and this one's on there. For me, it was a seminal moment like discovering Colors by Between the Buried and Me or Train of Thought by Dream Theater. It's an album that really changed my life. To me, it's a perfect album. I wouldn't change a single thing about it. I feel like they really found their sound here. They were getting there with Visions, but here they really landed on, I think, what the Haken sound is. You have the heaviness, you have the progressiveness, you have the complex instrumentals, all of that, but you have a lot of interesting vocal work here as well. I love the Gentle Giant influences on this album, all of the a cappella stuff like on Cockroach King, of course, but there's a lot of interesting vocal stuff throughout this whole album, like the End of Somebody, that cool ISO rhythm thing, which actually I'm going to talk about that at some point because it's really interesting. I love Falling Back to Earth. Atlas Stoned is one of my favorite Haken songs. There's just so much on this album. This is an album I'll put on a couple times a year, and every time I listen to it, I appreciate it even more. To me, this is their best album, and that's probably not going to change anytime soon. Of course, there's some bias there because this is the first album of theirs I listened to, but I would guess this ranks pretty high on most people's rankings of their albums. So let me know in the comments what your favorite Haken albums are. I'd be curious to know. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share, and I'll see you all in the next video. Till then, stay proggy.